All right, so we're going deep on Manchester City today, really dissecting their recent performances, or should I say lack thereof. I mean, you sent over a ton of analysis, and honestly, some of it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, well, it is intriguing to see this almost universal agreement that something has fundamentally shifted within the team. It's not just about a few losses. It's about a palpable change in their energy, their drive. It's like the DNA of the team has been altered.
There's this feeling they've become almost unrecognizable, right? Like, take their recent draw against Brentford, a team they completely dominated last season. The commentators are calling it a 50-50 match, which for the reigning champs is practically an insult. One even said if you swapped jerseys, you wouldn't have known who was who.
Yeah, that's a powerful visual, and it speaks to that perceived lack of identity City are currently displaying. The commentators are saying Brentford didn't deserve to lose, but importantly, City didn't deserve to win either, which is a huge statement when you're talking about a team of their caliber.
And then there's this whole idea of a mental slump. Like, experts are suggesting City has lost their edge now that the thrill of the title chase is fading. It's like they're just coasting, aiming for a top 4 finish and maybe the FA Cup, but without that fire.
It really begs the question, can any team stay at the top forever? How do you maintain that hunger, that drive to win year after year? We've seen so many examples of teams that dominated for a period then just faded. What the commentators are picking up on is whether or not we're seeing the start of that process with City.
And they're not mincing words. One even used the word mediocre to describe their play. For a team that was considered the best in the world just 6 months ago, that's pretty harsh.
Yeah, it is. And that's the real head scratcher here. Nobody is saying that City's players suddenly lost their skills or their fitness. They're still physically capable of playing at the highest level. What's being questioned is their mentality, their psychological approach to the game.
Yeah, it's like their ability and their fitness are still there. But that mental fortitude, that winner's mindset, that's what seems to be missing. Almost like the pressure of maintaining that dominance has become this burden.
This is where Pep Guardiola's leadership comes into focus. The commentators are really scrutinizing his methods, particularly his tendency to publicly criticize players even during matches. One commentator, and a former player himself, even called it embarrassing to watch, suggesting it could be detrimental to the player's confidence.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Pep's on-field outbursts. Does it motivate the players, or is it adding fuel to the fire, especially when they're already struggling?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises questions about the communication and trust between the manager and the players. Is Pep's style, which has been undeniably successful in the past, still effective in the current situation?
It's interesting, though, because some experts are saying this is just Pep's way, and it's what's brought them success in the past. So is he part of the problem, or is he trying to fix it with the tools he knows?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's complex, and the commentators present multiple viewpoints. Some believe Pep needs to adapt his methods, maybe even adopt a more supportive approach, while others think he just needs to stay the course. It's almost like City's success has created this impossible situation for Pep. How do you improve on perfection?
And then you have this whole other layer with the rumors about players potentially leaving. Kyle Walker has been pretty vocal about wanting a new challenge, and there's speculation that others might follow. Are these just isolated cases, or is there a deeper issue at play?
The commentators are definitely drawing a link between the team's overall mood and these potential departures. The speculation is that some players might be feeling disillusioned, lacking motivation, or perhaps just seeking fresh starts elsewhere. It's almost as if the team's collective dip in form is mirrored in these individual desires to move on.
And they're not just talking about any league either, right? They're mentioning Major League Soccer and the Saudi Pro League. These aren't exactly places players go when they're at the peak of their careers. It's more like a change of pace.
Right, it's almost like a search for something different, a new challenge, maybe even a less intense environment. If these players do end up leaving, it would signal a significant shift for City, forcing them to rebuild and potentially ushering in a new era for the club.
What's interesting is how the commentators keep bringing up specific moments in recent matches. Like, they're using these snapshots to illustrate City's decline.
Yeah, it's like they're searching for visual cues, trying to pinpoint when and where this shift in mentality happened. They talked about a few examples, like that moment against name of opposing team where name of City player had a clear shot at goal but hesitated, and the opportunity was gone.
It's like they're diagnosing the problem by looking at the symptoms. If you can see where things are breaking down on the pitch, maybe you can understand the root cause, right?
Right. It's a bit like a detective piecing together clues. And speaking of piecing things together, let's talk tactics. The commentators didn't hold back, suggesting that maybe Pep's tactical approach needs a refresh.
Okay, hold on. They're not saying his tactics are bad, are they? I mean, Pep Guardiola is considered a tactical genius.
Nobody's disputing his brilliance. But what the commentators are suggesting is that maybe his system, which has worked so well in the past, has become predictable.
So maybe other teams have figured out how to counter it.
Exactly. It's like a game of chess. You have to anticipate your opponent's moves, adapt your strategy, and find new ways to outmaneuver them. Or you risk falling behind.
They even brought up some specific examples of tactical innovations that are giving City trouble. One commentator mentioned name of specific tactical innovation, saying City hasn't figured out how to deal with it yet.
Right. They pointed out how teams like name of team and name of team are using it to disrupt City's flow, create chances, and frustrate them.
Right.
It's like they've found a weakness, and now everybody's trying to exploit it.
That's fascinating. It really shows how dynamic football is. Tactics and strategies are always evolving, and teams have to adapt. But let's be real, tactics are only part of it. You need the players to execute them.
Absolutely. The commentators spent a lot of time talking about individual player performances and how some key players are underperforming this season.
Like, name a City player. He was crucial to their success last season, but this year, he's just not been the same. The commentators even speculated he might be carrying an injury, or maybe lacking motivation.
They also talked about name a City player and how his form has dipped. One commentator even wondered if he was feeling the pressure of being the main goal scorer, especially with all the rumors about name of other City player leaving.
And that's the other big cloud hanging over the club, right? This potential exodus of players. The commentators seem to think it's a real possibility and even discussed specific names who might be on their way out.
They mentioned name a City player who's been linked with a move to name of team, and then there's name a City player who's apparently considering a move abroad.
It's almost like there's this underlying uncertainty at the club. And it's not just about who might leave, but who they can bring in to replace them. The commentators mentioned a few potential targets, but also acknowledged how difficult it is to find players who can fit into Pep's system.
Right, they emphasized how Pep has a very specific style of play, and it takes a certain type of player to thrive in that environment. It's not just about talent, it's about intelligence, adaptability, and a willingness to buy into Pep's philosophy.
So it seems like City is facing challenges both on and off the pitch, dealing with a dip in form, tactical questions, potential player departures, and the pressure of staying on top in a really competitive league.
And all those challenges are connected.
Yeah.
If they lose key players, it'll be tougher to maintain their tactical approach. And if they struggle tactically, it could lead to more losses and further erode player confidence. It's complex with no easy answers.
And what about Pep Guardiola? Where does he fit into all of this? The commentators were quite critical of his leadership, especially that public criticism of his players. Do they see him as part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? The commentators seem divided. Some felt that Pep's intensity and his demanding style might be contributing to the team's struggles, while others argued that those very qualities are what brought them so much success.
So I guess the question is, can he find a way to balance that demanding nature with a more supportive approach, especially now when they're struggling?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
One commentator, a former player himself, suggested that Pep needs to adapt how he communicates. He said something like, players need to feel supported, especially when they're going through a tough time. Public criticism can be really demoralizing. It can erode trust.
So it's not about going soft on them, but about finding that sweet spot between pushing for excellence and offering support.
Exactly. And it's also about understanding that different players respond to different things. What motivates one player might completely demoralize another. So the challenge for Pep is to figure out how to tailor his approach to each player while still holding on to his high standards and his style of play.
It really does feel like we're watching a dynasty teetering on the edge, right? Like
Right.
City's dominance is slipping, their armor is cracking, and now we're seeing these consequences everywhere, from their tactics to the players' morale.
What's so fascinating is how this goes beyond wins and losses. The commentators are painting this picture of a club at a crossroads where every single decision, every result carries so much weight.
It makes you think about all those other great teams that have fallen from grace. The commentators even brought up Liverpool's decline after their golden age. One of them, actually a former Liverpool player, said, "It wasn't a sudden collapse, but this gradual wearing down of their edge." So is that what's happening with City? This slow fade from the top?
It's the big question looming over everything, isn't it? Are we witnessing the end of an era or just a blip for a team that's still packed with talent?
The commentators seemed really worried about how this dip in form is affecting the players mentally. They talked about how when you're used to winning titles year after year, fighting for a top four spot might not feel as inspiring.
Right, it's like they've conquered Everest and now they're being asked to climb a hill. The challenge for Pep, according to the commentators, is to find a way to rekindle that fire, to make his players believe that every match, every point still matters.
But how do you even do that after achieving so much? How do you stay hungry when you've already tasted ultimate success? It's almost a philosophical question. What keeps us striving when we've reached the peak?
That's the paradox of success, right? It can motivate and demotivate at the same time. The commentators are suggesting that City's players might be grappling with this. They've won it all. They've lifted every trophy. Maybe they've lost sight of what they're playing for now.
And then you layer on the whole issue of Pep Guardiola's leadership style. The commentators were split on whether his methods are still working, especially his habit of publicly criticizing players. Some thought it was hurting morale, while others said it's part of what makes him so demanding and successful.
The interesting thing is this debate about Pep's style isn't new. He's always been a controversial figure, admired and criticized. But now, with City struggling, his methods are under the microscope again.
Are the commentators saying Pep needs to change his approach, to maybe soften his edges a bit?
They're definitely suggesting that some adjustments might be needed. One commentator, a sports psychologist, actually talked about how important it is to create a positive and supportive environment, especially when players are going through a rough patch. He said public criticism can backfire. It can make them lose confidence and become afraid to take risks.
So it's not about going easy on them, but about finding that balance between pushing for excellence and offering support.
Exactly. And realizing that different players need different things. What motivates one might discourage another. The challenge for Pep, as the commentators see it, is to adapt his approach to each individual player, while still keeping his high standards and his style of play intact.
So considering everything we've discussed, what's the outlook for Manchester City? Are they heading for a downfall, or can they recover and get back on top?
Well, as we've heard throughout this deep dive, there are lots of different opinions and no clear answer. Some believe this is a temporary setback. City has the talent and the resources to turn things around. Others are more pessimistic. They think this could be the start of a longer decline.
It's obvious City is at a turning point. The decisions they make in the next few months about their manager, their players, their tactics will shape their future. Will they stick to what worked in the past or make big changes trying to adapt and reclaim their dominance?
It's such a compelling situation, and we'll all be watching to see how it unfolds. This deep dive hasn't given us all the answers, but it has given us a way to understand the challenges City are facing, how complex the situation is, and the possibilities that lie ahead.
So for everyone listening, the question is, what do you think will happen? Will Manchester City rise again, or is this the beginning of the end for them? Only time will tell, and that's what makes this whole story so captivating. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and keep those sources coming.